Idaho. In a previous video, I spoke about the suspension changes I made on my Scout for better cornering clearance. So today I have the details for you. You know I love my Scout, and my only reservation after riding it for a while is that I had to be careful not to drag it into corners. And I'm no road racer, but it was pretty easy to drag. So the solution is longer shocks and taller front suspension. But that's easier said than done. I did an exhaustive search for shocks and couldn't find anything that was made for the Scout that was about 12.5 inches long. The longest length shock you can use on the Scout without bottoming out the swing arm against the frame is 12 3/8. At any rate, I searched the internet high and low, eBay, Amazon, Drag Specialties, JP Cycles, all the usual suspects, and couldn't find anything made for the Scout. But I wasn't about to give up, and so I started looking at shocks for other motorcycles that I might be able to use with a little modification. And so eventually I found an adjustable length shock from Drag Specialties that is ostensibly sold for the Harley-Davidson Dyna. Now the Dyna is a little bit heavier than the Scout, but the Scout suspension puts more leverage on the shock because of its geometry, and so I took a risk and bought the Drag Specialty shocks. These shocks are made for a Harley-Davidson Dyna. The issue with using shocks not made for the Scout and made for the Dyna is the eyelet size. The eyelets on the Scout shocks are 12 millimeter, and they're held on with 12 millimeter bolts that screw into the rear frame and into the swing arm. And the Dyna has 1/2 inch eyelets. The difference is about 30 thousandths of an inch, about a 32nd of an inch. And so I played around with making spacers or bushings, and then I finally hit upon the idea of I'll just make different bolts. And so, since my lathe that's on order hasn't come in, I have a friend with a lathe, and I went over there with some 6-inch long 1/2 inch bolts, and we turned down the area that needs to be threaded to 12 millimeter, and then put 12 millimeter threads on it. So it's a little bit of a bastard, but they work great. It turns out that they have a 3/4 inch head, which is almost exactly 19 millimeter, so I don't need to carry a special wrench. And they thread into the frame. They go through the eyelet, they thread into the frame, and with the adjustable length, I get the perfect maximum length for the shock. Got a little doe confused here in the road. Gotta love Idaho. So that took care of the back end. I gained 1.2 inches in height for the back end, and so I needed to make an equal adjustment in the front so that the bike would sit flat again and have roughly the same steering geometry as it did from the factory, just sitting a little bit taller. Well, I've worked my way through college as a motorcycle mechanic, and I've competed on motorcycles when I was younger, and so I've made a lot of front forked changes to most of the bikes that I've owned. One of the easiest changes is to put air fork caps on the stock shocks, and so you trap a little air in there. Well, the air is already trapped, but you add a little air pressure. On my trials bikes, when I was doing this, it was about 7 to 8 psi. On a road bike that I did, it was about 10 or 12. Motocross bikes were a little more, 12 to 18. Anyway, I've done it on lots of bikes over lots of years. And so when somebody tells you that, oh no, you'll just blow out your fork seals and it'll be a mess and you won't have anything. Well, in practicality, those that have done it know it actually works really well. And in all the bikes I've modified since 1977, I've never had a fork seal blowout from a bike that I put air caps on. And so this is actually a good solution for raising the front of the bike up. And the stock suspension sits about 50% up and 50% down when I'm sitting on it. I weigh 200 pounds, and so I actually prefer more of a racing suspension where you get 80% up and 20% down. And so that change is perfect with adding air to the air shocks. And so now I have a Scout that's a little bit taller, 1.2 inches. I can park it in a parking lot full of Scouts and no one can tell the difference. But it makes a big difference on cornering ground clearance. Since I've done the change about 1,000 miles ago, I haven't drug anything on the bike in any kind of a corner or on speed bumps in town or on the highway. So the Drag Specialty shocks have successfully raised the rear of the scooter up about 1.2 inches. But in order to maintain the handling that came from the factory, we now need to raise the front end up. The good news is that from the factory, when you sit on the Scout, it uses up almost 50% of its total travel. I prefer it to use up 20% of its total travel so that I have 80% up and 20% down. So this coincides with raising the front of the bike. And I use air to do that. So I've machined some fork caps that have a air fitting that allows me to put air into the shock. And in order to keep the air going into the shock the same for both sides, I run the line into this aluminum block that I made to mount my headlight. And so here's the line for the right side. On the other side of the aluminum block, there's the line for the left side. And then they both feed into this Schrader valve, which is a tire valve, and it allows me to put air into the front shocks with a bicycle pump. I put about 15 psi into my bike front shocks to gain some ride height in the front to match the rear. The next topic is tuning. How do I know what I'm getting? Well, it's a real simple thing that's been used by track racers and people that are tuning suspensions for a really long time. Just take a wire tie and put it on your front fork and slide it all the way down. Now you can get the bike off the kickstand and sit on it and see how much travel it's using. And you can use it to see how much travel you're using in corners, how much you're using for speed bumps or hard braking. And that's one of the things that allows you to tune a suspension. You can do the same thing in the rear, but it's a little harder to see and it's a little harder to do. But I've put a wire tie on the rear shocks as well, and so I can see how much travel they're using in normal use. What if I go over a speed bump? What if I'm cornering hard? And how much does it sag when I sit on it? And so it's a nice little tuning aid. And right now I'm very happy with the tuning of the suspension on the Scout. It sits a little higher than it did, like I said, 1.2 inches. But most people couldn't pick this bike out of a parking lot full of Indian Scouts and say, "Oh, look, that one's taller." Because it just doesn't look taller. It's already really low to start with. But the cornering advantage I get is definitely worth it. I haven't touched down a foot peg or an exhaust pipe or anything on the bottom of this bike in hard cornering, like I used to do a lot before I changed it. Here's a set of fork caps I made for my Scout as well. I think I may like these better, but I haven't put them on the bike and tried it. They are certainly a lot less work. So you can see the fitting. This is basically a 1/8 inch hose barb on a 1032 thread, and they seal with a small O-ring. And that fitting connects to this hole in the bottom, and so you can add air to the shock. I have a clear plexiglass fairing that I put on my Scout, and it comes right across the top, and so I didn't just drill straight down. I put it in at a 45-degree angle and then made this hole match it. These are the fork caps for 2018 and later cartridge forks. If you have a 15 or a 16 or a 17, 2015, 16, or 17, why, it won't have this threaded hole. The whole bottom will be hollow. But the air fork cap part can still be done exactly like this. You just make a hole 45 degrees and you're all done. These are certainly much easier to do. The fork caps that I made were quite a bit of work on a milling machine. But these certainly would work as well. And so next time I do maintenance on the shocks or whatnot, I'm going to put these on and see if I like them. As usual, if you like or dislike my video, please select the appropriate button and let me know why. I really appreciate comments and I will answer every one. If you're new to my videos, please select the subscribe and the notification bell to get more videos like this.